So we come to the next presentation of this morning. This will be Christoph Schneider, Head of IT and Operation of GLEIF, and he will talk more about organizational identity in the private and public sector with the Vlei. So would like to give a big hand for Christoph. Go down.
This is forward. And thank you, Robert, for the invitation also to IDnext. And thank you, Esther, for a very good reality check of where we are, especially in the IDAS and the EWC large-scale pilot, where GLEIF is also an associated partner. I think that's what's in the head of many people, but I heard it on the first time on stage, so that's good. All right, the theme today is unlocking digital self, and I think that many of us think about ourselves as natural persons when we think about the digital self, but there's of course also an aspect of organizations that have a digital self and a self-sovereign identity. So I'm going to talk about organizational identity today for the private and the public sector. And for those who don't have the background, I will give an overview of the global LEI system first. So I'm Christoph, I'm head of IT of the Global LEI Foundation, which is based in Switzerland. What we think organizational identity is and what it can, which problems it can solve, and then a specific use case for a private-public sector reporting with the European Banking Authority, but we'll come to that after the introduction. All right, so back in 2011, the G20 leaders initiated the global legal entity identifier system. After the financial crisis with Lehman Brothers 2008, regulators were faced worldwide with the problem that they could not clearly identify organizations in financial transactions and ownership structures within corporates, and one of the measures taken was to create the global LEI system, which has three pillars basically. One is a regulatory oversight committee with public regulators around the world. Second, on the right-hand side, you see the Global LEI Foundation, which I represent. And then we have a federated system of local operating units. That's a bit technical term. We call them LEI issuers. And they issue LEI codes to organizations and maintain the reference data that is connected to legal entity identifiers. The foundation, as I mentioned already, is Swiss-based. It's a public, it's a private foundation, but created by a public body, the Financial Stability Board at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. And we are a non-profit organization. And we are overseen by this Regulatory Oversight Committee, which currently has 71 regulators and 19 observers from over 50 countries now. And the GLEIF also has a board of directors of 16 independent persons from the private industry who oversee our budget and stuff. And we have 37 partners for LEI issuing, and they are getting more and more. And now almost 2.8 million issued LEIs at this point. What is an LEI? There are still some people around who don't know that, so I don't know if I have a laser pointer. So here, unfortunately, it's super small, but this is the LEI code. So this is a 20-digit code from letters and numbers. And this is the code that is issued to organizations who apply for one by one of these LEI issuers, and it is worldwide unique. That means it is never used twice, and also one organization can only have one of these codes. So if you see an LEI code, it is globally unique. You always know that refers to that specific legal entity, nothing else, and it will never change. It says here it's a lifelong identifier owned by the respective legal entity, and that means that even if the company stops existing, the LEI code will still be in GLEIF's database, and you can look it up and you can see that it retired, but it does not go away and it is not reused. It does point to associate reference data, for example, the name of the organization, also the address, which is not displayed here. You can also see the link to the domestic business register with the business register code in the local jurisdiction, the local jurisdiction of formation, the type of the legal form, and whether it's active or inactive. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we also have what we call level 2 data, that is who owns whom. So other organizations owned by that organization which do have also an LEI, are also listed here, and you can see the ownership structures. And it's based on an ISO standard, ISO 17442, so for broad global applicability. And what many people don't know is the LEI is not only for corporates or generally companies, it can be any type of legal entity. That means any organization that is legally accepted in their legal jurisdiction is eligible for an LEI. That can also be clubs, churches, funds, government organizations, everything that is legally recognized. All right, now that we have the background, let's talk about organizational identity. And we heard it already in the opening from Robert. There is, of course, a need to know who you're dealing with. You have these friends online, you know them, but now, of course, you don't know them and you don't know who's behind it. You all know this famous cartoon from the Washington Post where this dog is in front of the computer and says on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. That's exactly the case. So if you want to do business especially, you need to know who you're doing business with, and that in an online, real-time, reliable fashion. And we know what it leads to when this does not work. All of you have seen this: identity impersonation, fraud, social engineering. We all got these SMSs from I don't know which provider to get our parcel unlocked and just click here and we'll do it for you. Even robocalls. I don't know if you also received Europol or Interpol calls last year. That was a very famous thing. And you just don't know who it is that is attempting to contact you, and that's a problem. So the original focus of the LEI and the GLEIF was to solve the problem of identity in financial transactions, but that's only the origin. The LEI is much broader, and as it states here, with the Legal Entity Identifier as a basis, GLEIF has now developed organizational credentials, which we call verifiable LEIs, or short VLEIs. And these are able to verify the identity of an organization as well as the people that represent the organization, because organizations itself don't act. It's always persons that act in a role for an organization, and not only inside but also outside the boundaries of this organization. And this is how it looks. We heard about wallets before, so this is a credential that could be in, or needs to be in, a kind of wallet. And of course we have the real world, so there's always an organization, there's always a person, could also be a thing. You all know the Internet of Things or Industry 4.0. And they have a specific role towards that organization. And these are the three pieces of information that we're packaging into a VLEI. The organization represented with, surprise, a legal entity identifier code, the person with a name, the thing with some other identifier, and the role either just with a self-defined role, or there's also an ISO standard, ISO 5009, for official organizational roles like the managing director of a limited company in a specific country. That has been standardized and can be used in this aspect too. And this information is cryptographically bound in this credential, so that if you have that for your organization, you can prove that verifiable in an online transaction. Okay, and next to a credential, we also talked about why do you know that you can rely on such a credential? Who do you want to trust? Is it the private industry? Is it the state? And with the Global LEI Foundation, we have a very special vehicle, which is a private Swiss foundation, but is public body backed by the Regulatory Oversight Committee with a worldwide coverage. So the GLEIF is the manager of the VLEI's ecosystem. And another important aspect is that each VLEI requires an underlying LEI. So it's not an alternative, but it's a cryptographic wrapper around the LEI code. And then also the VLEI has now been recognized as an ISO standard. So we have, together with ISO, extended 17442 with a part 3. which specifically covers the VLEI and the schemas that we have defined for organizations and persons representing these organizations. And I think the slides will be shared afterwards, so if you're interested, you can look it up. And GLEIF has, based on this role above, put itself as the cryptographic root of trust. You can see this here in this picture, at the top of what we call the VLEI trust chain, because VLEI credentials are not just standalone, they are linked to each other. So if you're on the receiving end, we talked about relying parties earlier, and you receive a presentation of somebody pretending that he or she represents this organization in this role, then you can not only cryptographically verify that this information is true, you can also walk up the trust chain and check, is this person related to this organization? Has this organization received an authentic VLEI from what we call a qualified VLEI issuer? That's the pendant to the LEI issuer in the digital world. And has this QVI, as we abbreviate it, been qualified by the Global LEI Foundation? And then you know, okay, it really comes from the source of trust, and it's not just somebody using the same technology and pretending to issue VLEIs. Yeah, we already covered the QVIs here, so these are the issuers in the system. It's again a federated system. GLEIF does not have an operating role for scaling issues mostly. And they issue these credentials to organizations on the one hand side, but then more importantly, perhaps to persons who represent these organizations. And now there's two types of role credentials that GLEIF has defined, because there are different use cases, so to speak, that need to be covered in the business world. The first one are the official organizational roles that we abbreviate as OOR roles. And these are the roles that you can either in a public register identify, or you can prove by a contract or another document. For example, public roles like CEOs, CFOs, board members, and these type of roles that then are also covered by this ISO standard I mentioned before, and that come with certain authorities that are defined by law. So you know, okay, if a CEO is in front of you, they usually have signing powers depending on the legal form, together or alone, and you know what you can do with these rights. But there's more to this. There are more use cases than just official roles. There are also more flexible roles, and we call them engagement context roles, or short ECRs. They have the same schema, so to speak, organization, person, role, but the roles can be anything. And that because you have roles within your own organization that are not necessarily official roles that you can prove, but like me, I'm head of IT, this is written in no register and nothing. So I could have an ECR, and I do have one for GLEIF, with that role. Or you have a procurement manager and you want to set a certain role for somebody to be able to purchase things up to 50,000 euros or things like that, and use basically to do this also for authorization, to give certain rights to persons with this concept. And then of course also outside the organization, you could think about issuing VLEI ECR credentials to your trusted suppliers and ask them to digitally sign invoices sent to you and only accept them, and by this avoid fraud by wrong invoices sent to you and then being paid wrongly. And this is also the type of credential that I will highlight in the specific business case that we will look at in a moment. And here we go. So we're doing this for more than 5 years now, preparing this whole system, and we thought about, okay, what's actually the VLEI use cases? And of course, you can imagine a million specific small use cases and business cases, like invoice signing, like securing a web portal, like securing other digital content, but it all burns down to 3 basic use cases, so to speak. And the first one being digital signing. That's not new. That can also be done with digital certificates today, like you have seen perhaps in Adobe PDF documents and stuff like that. So it is digital sealing or signing of documents by a legal entity or an authorized representative, with the advantage that you always have the connection back to the originating source, because the LEI is always embedded into the Vlei. And then, of course, the verification of cryptographic validity of the Vlei digital and signature, so authentication. That just means you know who you're dealing with, who logs into your web portal, who is sending you a message, who is sending you stuff. And thirdly, permissioning, or what is usually referred to as authorization. So what is somebody or something allowed to do? And that can be either based on this official role, or on a user-defined role, as we have seen in the ECR credentials. Yeah, and that's our private sector reporting to public sector use case. So we have been working for more than 2 years now with the European Banking Authority, who happens to be one of the members of the Regulatory Oversight Committee, but they have a specific business case to address. As it stands, the EBA receives reports from the member states' banks in the European Union, and these reports are collected by the national banks. So EBA today has about 36 users. These are the national banks in the European Union. They collect all the information, all the reports from the domestic banks, and send it then aggregated to the European Banking Authority, and that is just a SFTP account, and they manage the accounts for the member states' central banks. And if somebody forgets a password, then they fix that, and if they need a new user, then they issue that. So they have a small operations team servicing this upload interface. But there's a new regulation out there which now forces the EBA to receive reports directly from all banks. And suddenly we're talking about 600 organizations with multiple users. And the question was obviously, okay, how should we deal with a multitude of users? Now they all have at least 2 to 3 users and password management and everything, and new users. Having to hire a whole new team to basically address this, or what do we do? And then they learned about the Vlei and asked themselves if this could be a solution. And that made us start a proof of concept last year, where the idea was basically each bank receives Vlei credentials for their authorized submitters, and uses these credentials to log into an EBA portal instead of EBA managing the accounts. Because actually, EBA does not need to know which individual is uploading to them. Everything they need to know is, and I'll be with you in a moment, is which organization is uploading to them, and has the individual been authorized to upload to them. And Esther, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question on the binding to the natural persons. Because if you have, thank you, if you have an organizational identity, and struggling with that, we'll come back to that later, but so they have Vlei, which is great, but now there's people working from them. Mm-hmm. And how do you cryptographically bind that actual person? What attributes, what binding do you use to make sure that this really is the person working for the bank? Because it needs to be bound to that user, not just to them, their attributes. It doesn't, a certificate is not enough. How do you realize that binding to make sure this is an actual, the
bank
actual
employee.
Intended bank employee doing it, and not some imposter who managed to get his hands on credentials?
Yeah. So in the issuing of Vleis, there is a set of actions included that basically authorize somebody to receive such a credential, including a video ident where you have to show your passport and things like that, and then you control it by a passcode at the end of the day.
Passcode, passkeys, accounts, username, password. What's the means?
You have a locally installed wallet and a passcode to that.
Locally installed wallet, so machine.
Yeah, on a machine.
Okay, so if I hand my laptop to my colleague, they can impersonate me.
If they have your passcode.
Yeah, that's on the post-it next to it. Okay, thank you. No. It's just that, because this is one of the toughest things to do, is binding the individual person, especially if they're not listed in business registers, to act on behalf of a company and know for sure that it's the right person, and not just someone who happened to be able to access the laptop and the application.
Yeah. So if you have both the laptop and the passcode, that's the two factors that you need to. that you need to overcome.
The same, I believe, goes for the wallets, right? So we didn't ask you the question earlier.
Wallets and user, well, organizational wallets is different, but natural personal wallets are more strictly bound to the user. Yeah. There's requirements on those. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Netherlands, I haven't seen them.
Okay, look, no, there's more strict requirements there.
All right. So, yeah, please.
I believe Telegram used to say, I love standards because there are so many of them. And I was just wondering, because I think this is a verified organizational standard, but on the other hand, we all have our chamber of commerce, all countries have them.
Yep.
It used to be the VRIS in Europe, to say all those chamber of commerce numbers with pre-indication of the country, and they have also been...
You're referring to the EU ID, I believe.
I think so. But, I mean, is this why there is a legal entity identifier? Just to be verified, or is
the legal...
Is it the competition for the VRIS?
It is
the BRIS is just an aggregator. It's just an aggregator that makes lookups over different business registers more easy than that.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So if you
But
look,
it has no legal...
if you look at the LEI code, we talked about the reference data, and you can see here that is the registration code. So for a Dutch company, you would find the KVK code here, and now you can even click on it and get to the KVK page and see the details there. So yes, there is a reference to the local business register, and that is also what the BRIS system with the EU ID does. The difference is that the legal entity identifier is global, so there's exactly one country where you today can't get an LEI, that's North Korea. Every other country is covered, so it's a broader coverage. And as I mentioned, each organization, even not in the business register, can receive an LEI, so you just have a broader applicability.
Thank you.
So we were talking about the European Banking Authority's problem with managing these 600 banks and all their users, and doing a proof of concept with users of these banks receiving a VLEI, because, as I mentioned already, the EBA actually does not care who is coming and uploading as long as they know it is this organization and the person has been authorized. And that gives, on the other hand, the banks the flexibility to not be dependent on the European Banking Authority to get a new account for a new colleague or reset a password if it's done because they're using in a more decentralized way in this federated model of VLEI issuers with an organization they actually can choose and manage their own identities and unlock their digital self, as we said at the beginning. And the technical proof of concept last year was successful. There was also positive feedback from Gartner, who had evaluated the technical solution. And now this year we have concluded, almost concluded, not officially concluded, a pilot project with a bit more than 10 real banks who participated in this, received VLEI credentials for their users, and tried to log into the portal and make their updates, their uploads, which are also digitally signed. So once the report is uploaded to the European Banking Authority and stored in the database, they still know who it originates from because of that digital signature, and that has not been changed. And as a nice additional feature, once the user from the bank is logged into the web portal from EBA, the HTTP communication is also digitally signed with the private key of the VLEI credential. So basically all the 3 use cases that I just presented are covered in this pilot, which makes it very nice for us. And you never know with a regulator, but we hope that we will have some public communication before Christmas on this. And thank you very much.
Can I ask one last question?
Yeah, sure, because we have some time for questions.
Because organizational identity is tough, and it's part of the wallets as well, and the IDs. And And what we're looking at is member states who really are struggling because they have to now issue identities to organizations. And that really is, it's different from a Chamber of Commerce register, because an organization is a concept. I mean, if I issue an identity to a person, a natural person, when in doubt, I can sort of, grab that person and push it to a counter and start all sorts of checking. But what is an organization? And there's a lot of countries struggling with that. Not all countries have business registers. Some have different registers that together combined provide the data that we recognize as a business register. And there's a lot of countries where business registers are not government endorsed because they stem from something like the Yellow Pages. Now, my question to you, because yes, organizations are broader than the ones registered in business registers, if you have them. Then there's business registers who will register, but there's no government backup. So how do the LEI and Vlei issuers relate to that?
Yeah,
do they, because at some point, especially in the context of EIDAS, it will be relevant to know what a certain geographic area or judicial area recognizes as an organization.
Yes, that's a fantastic question. And it's not only that there are countries without official business registers, there are also companies where you would think they are quite developed, like Germany, who do have business registers. Let's not talk about how they are organized with all these courts in each city. Yeah? But the majority of German organizations are not registered in the business register. So that's also a thing. Not every legal form of an organization is actually mandated to be in the business register, and not all can. And I mean, we're doing this for 10 years now with the global LEI system. We have a list of registration authorities. That's a publicly available list, and these are the ones that we accept as business registers. So these are the ones that our LEI issuers use. And then, of course, there are these organizations who are not in a register, but for example, I also have a small firm on my name, and I just went to the town hall, registered it, got a piece of paper with a number, but that is in no register. You cannot look it up and nothing. So if I were to receive an LEI for my organization, I would have to approach an LEI issuer and then provide this document as a proof that the organization exists, and they would take that. And what we do in the reference data of each LEI, you have a field that is called corroboration level. And that shows you either fully corroborated, that means every piece of reference data was checked against a publicly accessible register. The second option is partially corroborated, that means parts of the reference data were at least checked against that. And then there's entity supplied only, that means only by documents that the entity itself supplied it was done, but you can clearly see this, at least in the reference data, because that's the best thing that is possible. You cannot do more for an organization that is not in a register, and that's just a reality.
Yeah, no, I agree. Legal interoperability is a very long shot.
And every legal jurisdiction, as you also hinted at already, defines, of course, which organizations they recognize, and that's what we work on. So it is a huge list of possible forms. Yeah. The entity legal forms is actually also an ISO standard that we have helped to create, and that is publicly accessible, and organizations or anybody who is interested can see which legal forms are recognized in the various countries and legal jurisdiction on the world. There was another question.
Yeah, we also had it first. Christina?
I have a little bit a question that doesn't relate to the tech solutions really, but I heard you mention that you're a foundation and you have been working for 10 years with this and approaching countries. So I'm a little bit curious who funds your foundation and has initiated it.
Mm-hmm. So it was initiated by the Financial Stability Board in Basel, Switzerland. And we're funded by the fees that the registrants pay. So if your organization wants or has to have an LEI, because the LEI is also legally mandated in many countries, also in the European Union, every organization who trades financial instruments at a European stock exchange must have an LEI. Then you pay a fee, which is today about 50 euros, and GLEIF gets a share of that. That is currently $11 per LEI.
For profit, are they?
No, we don't make profits. That's just to fund the operations, and the price has been lowered since the inauguration many times. It was $20 at the beginning, now it's 11.
We also have a question from Maarten.
Yeah, so I have one LAI, so I pay my €50 a year.
Thanks for paying my salary.
Yeah, my other 5 companies don't have it. Most of them do have a DUNS number, which seems to be the international standard and way more popular. So how would you kind of, so what's the coverage of LAI versus DUNS, and how do I make sure I don't need 2 numbers?
Okay. Have you looked at your DUNS number and the data that they have about your companies?
Yeah, I looked at both. I did it during the call, during your presentation.
Okay.
The LOI numbers, by the way, the data is not fully correct, at least for some of the companies. But yeah.
So I don't know. GLEIF has 4 DUNS numbers, depending on which country you look, and they're all wrong. They have wrong board members, wrong CEOs, and that's because there is no quality assurance of the reference data for DUNS. I don't know where they get the information, but they don't get confirmation from the organizations for sure that it is correct. And with the LEI system, you as a registrant, first of all, you provide the information that we store, and then there's the third-party check either against a registry or against a document that has to be provided, plus a challenge management system. So if you find an LEI code and you say, actually this address is not accurate, they have moved or something like that, then it's 2 clicks for you to challenge this information, and the LEI issuer has to react within 10 business days to your challenge and check if that is accurate, and if you're right, then update it. So yes, not every data is wrong and not every data is right in no system. But there are many things in the LEI system that improve the quality of that. There's a specific team that we have that looks at data quality management. And I mean, I'm no expert on DUNS, but what I have seen for our organization
I recognize that DUNS is kind of for free, and you fill in some forms and you get a DUNS number. Yeah, and LOI is a more stricter process, and it links back to in the Netherlands, KVK. But how do you then expand the coverage, right? So how do you make sure that it's, let's say, I really have 6 companies, only one of them is LAY, because that one does something on the financial sector, which I think is, it's probably like 10% or 5% of the companies in Europe or worldwide would have to have one. So how do you make that 100%?
Yeah, so I don't know if it will ever be 100%. If we would get closer to that, would already be great. Regulation was in the past an important cornerstone for LEI coverage and continues to be. Europe is perhaps a bit done already with the regulation, but there are other areas in the world where we have still bigger growth. For example, India currently has released new regulation and are doing a lot with the LEI. So generally Asia is the largest growing area at the moment. And then of course the VLEI, we don't create that because we're bored. We thought what would be a value to an LEI holder. So basically motivate organizations not having to have an LEI, but wanting to have an LEI. So that is one approach to give people a value for that. And let's see what the other identity schemes. We're also, of course, working in the large-scale pilots with within EIDAS, right? And organization identity has not really been covered yet. So hopefully the LEI can also contribute a value there because of its broad coverage.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would be interested if the European governments start issuing identity, because of course they will not use LEI for that because it's not government controlled, so they're not doing that. That's a simple truth. Look at the wallets. There's wallets out there, but they need to push out their own. So they're not. The VLEI, I would certainly argue for having that as one of the referencing identifiers in there linked to the legal identity. What would happen if that contains different information than what the government would be issuing? Because that will happen at some point if you combine it.
So yes, there's just timing effects that business registers are sometimes, let's say, differently updated than the LEI reference data. In a perfect world, they would be aligned because it's the same source. And
governmental
the business
legal identity won't be just business register data. Yeah, there will be a difference there as well. So this is one of the really interesting things. And again, an organization is a concept. So identifiers typically are the ones things that everyone agrees on. But then if you go into any other attributes...
And that's okay. I mean, depending on the use case, perhaps also using then the reference data from the government or the LEI code, especially when it goes beyond the European Union and more. I think as long as the identifiers identify the same organization, we have solved a huge problem already.
But the same organization really is a hard concept. In the Netherlands, the tax authority does not exist. The tax authority is 53 legal entities acting under the Ministry of Finance.
That's fine.
And this is one of the simpler examples. This is what the core issue is legal...
But legal entities are defined because that's government made. So yes, there may be 53 organizations. Lehman was 800 organizations. But that means they are 53 organizations, so 53 LEIs.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you can resolve this today.
No. I just want to. It's not a challenge. It's just that this really at the core is harder.
Yeah,
I mean, once you have the identifier, that's great. It's all of the other attributes that. Yeah.
And to the point, I also think that the LEI should play a role there, either as an attribute. Let's see how it develops. There is no competition between the EU ID and the LEI because the LEI includes basically the EU ID. The question will be, what do we do with supply chains that go beyond the European Union? What do we do with the organizations that cannot have a business
that's
register
why
entry?
I argue
and that's why I also agree with you. I think it will be mandated to put the EU ID as the legal pit, but I still can't imagine how this should work. So we will see.
Leave it to 27 member states to come up with what
exactly.
legal pits
Exactly.
Yeah.
We still have a question, and also maybe not sure if you have a question also for Esther, because he gave a presentation about the wallet. So first Marijke, and then we'll also have a hand there.
Well, I want to react to Esther. I used to work for government a long time, so it's not said that the government doesn't want omarmen.
Embrace.
Doesn't want to embrace things like the LEI for a standard, because we also...
No, they will use it, but they will not use it as the core or main identifier for organizational identity. And the trick with Europe, it's not about the government, it's about 27 different member states, and each country does not have one government, because in the Netherlands, EIDs and identity is part of internal affairs. The business register, trust services are for economic affairs. I don't see them talking a lot.
One of the reasons that the former Chamber of Commerce Federation and those identifiers didn't work is that, for instance, in Italy, you have different regions that have their own Chamber of Commerce, so you have so much different registrations.
Over the whole of Europe, there's only one attribute that has, covers all organizations. That's the VAT number.
And that's also what I wanted to mention. Also, regarding to the e-wallets, you have the UMDS system in Europe, and they use the Chamber of Commerce numbers, but also the ION.
OIN, yes.
OIN, yeah. So I think it should be useful to have a talk in Europe with these kind of standards, with that kind of systems.
The way that organizations...
Because the VAT is just the KPK.
No, but the way that organizations are being administrated has history in the fact that, tax authorities are the ones historically driving identity management. Because if you want to have money, if you want to, like Napoleon, if you want to wage war, you need funding, and if you need money, you need to count people and companies to squeeze money out of them, and so you need to know who they are. That means that more than anything else, taxes and organizational registration are embedded in national legislation. And national legislation isn't interoperable across Europe. We can do a lot about standardization, we've always done. This is a great thing about being so many different countries in one area, but it won't be standardization that will fix this. It needs to be about actually understanding and defining what an organization is, agreeing on that. And the trick is, if we can do that, and now I'm talking over a decade ahead, if we can assign identity, legally bound identity, to a legal person, to a concept, imagine what we can bind identity to. It doesn't need to be physical. We can, if we manage that, we can take on the whole Internet of Things, the whole smart, self-evolving, self-learning, self-managing world, and we can handle that. And that is why handling organizational identity and really getting a firm grasp on it is so important, because it will take us into the next decades if we do it right.
That's really true. And following up on your last slide about the hope, Esther, the hope is, of course, that if there is business demand for certain things, look at international trade and which things have been possible since hundreds of years, like ships going from continent to continent. That was because people wanted to achieve something. And we have a similar opportunity here, because it's not only the states and the standards that drive these things, but also business demand. And if there is something that just works worldwide, then yeah, we have good hopes that it comes.
Yeah, so we have still 2 questions. One first here.
Yes, I have a question for Esther, actually.
Okay, sorry.
Hi, I'm a master's student, and I'm here to ask you all the questions that I have regarding my thesis. And regarding the EU ID wallet, I'm wondering, what is the difference between decentralized identification and self-sovereignty or data sovereignty?
Okay, first of all, both of them have hardly anything to do with the European wallets, because there's nothing decentralized about them, to be honest. European wallets are about governments issuing identity and trust mechanisms to their citizens. And because of the high requirements there, it appears to be decentralized. There's a decentralized ecosystem, but at the core, trust is not decentralized and will not be for a long time. So that's first. Then the concept self-sovereign identity emerged in the last decade and has always been challenged for its label, because especially legally, self-sovereignty is a really hard concept. Everyone said it's my data. Well, in practice, it's never about my data. No one wants my data. Everyone wants data about me that has been vouched by a third party. The concept of decentralized is in the wallets, because decentralized talks about 2 things. One is you do not rely on a single source of authority for all your verifications. So traditionally, if you look at the current EIDs, whether it's in the Netherlands or it's Bank ID or it's Neue Personalausweis, if you log on, you always talk to the single authority saying, hey, does this match? Is this all right? Or can I get data? With the wallets, what is happening is that part of these attributes, part of that data, part of that, yes, this is an actual citizen and this is some information, is taken away from that central authority, put in a wallet, and you can use it without, going to that single point all the time. So that's what makes it decentralized more than anything. Self-sovereign was more, I think, of a mandate or a how do you call that? Like a manifesto on, we should do this. What's interesting is that in the LSPs, especially DC4U and EWC, we see these 2 worlds come together. And we see the people from the traditional self-sovereign identity worlds who are working on hyperledger areas for mainly, and with DID and DIDComs, and the people from the trust services, PKI-based, more centrally oriented, come together. They use the same words, they mean completely different things, which is interesting. And I always let them carry on for a while to see if they notice. They don't, hardly. The trick here is in governance. So SSI typically comes from technical, operational, workable implementations that are based on identifiers. And if you really push through, then it falls through at, the same thing I challenged you about, is who is assigning the actual persons or the actual organizations to these identifiers, and how trustworthy is that? Because once you have that identifier, you can run with it. But if it's only the identifier, how do I know the vetting that goes into getting that, obtaining that, and then also, this is technical again, while using it. Self-sovereign identity also is a great advocate for pseudonymous, anonymous transactions. Well, if you're talking about government to citizen and high trust services, there's nothing anonymous about it. So I think that's the major differences. My personal belief is that the classical SSI won't survive this on a big operational scale. But we shouldn't just ship them off right away, because they've got some great concepts. They have put in some great work, and we can all learn from them. But yeah, well, one practical quote I seem to repeat weekly is, yeah, PKI isn't optimal, but it's not going away for the next 10 decades. So if you cannot use PKI, you won't play this game. And no matter how right you are, how much better of a solution you have, this is what's out there. This is what you have to work with.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have semi-technical, semi-organizational question. Suppose I am some organization and I am using this identifier. Fine. But usually inside organization you have multiple people who have like signature right.
Yes.
My question is, do you have some organizational or technical solution about how to delegate decision about internal role appointment inside organization?
Yes.
Should be done on your side, should be done inside organization. If inside organization, which one tool you are using for that, like a D document or something else? Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and we have limited time today. Otherwise, I would have also presented the Vlei governance ecosystem framework, which is a very comprehensive document. It's actually 24 PDF documents publicly on our website, which regulates the governance of the Vlei, what GLEIF does, what the Vlei issuers do, and what the legal entities have to do, so the organizations. And the answer to your question is both. So first of all, when an organization requests a Vlei from a Vlei issuer, somebody with signing authority, and with these banks now in the pilot, that was actually CEOs that had to join a meeting, authenticate themselves, like identify themselves, so that they approved, yes, my organization should have a Vlei, and then they delegate. That's an organizational process. And what GLEIF, or let's say the Vlei issuers then do, they technically delegate this authority with digital keys and delegated keys. We can talk about the underlying technology, which is CARI, the key event receipt infrastructure, which has been created for internet scale security. So there's a technical delegation to usually 3, sometimes more technical representatives that can be members of an HR department, can be tech administration, who do the actual issuance, because no CEO of any World Bank will do credential issuance to their employees. But today already you have processes and organizations where this is delegated somehow, and that's baked into the technical infrastructure and the processes both.
Is it a short question? Yeah, well,
short
maybe
question,
it's going to be a long answer.
Let's see if it's a long answer.
Either it's a short question or I'm going to do high-speed speaking. So hi, I'm Annika from the Digital ID Champion Germany. And I want to add on what you said, Esther. I mean, you mentioned IoT and the future a little bit there, right? And yeah. I would like to add to that graph that you draw from going from the little bicycle to the high-speed train. I think the next one would be in fully autonomous car, right? And that's what we have to think about, because if we assign identities to other entities that are not natural persons, as you mentioned, in the end it's going to be about liability, and it's going to be about who to blame, right, in case something happens. And
it's also going to be about who owns that car, because look at today's cars, it's not your car. Exactly. And there's at least 5 other competitors for owning your car.
Yeah, plus if you just accidentally kill somebody with that car, is that the driver's mistake? Is that the mistake of the OEM? Is that the mistake of the supplier? Or is it maybe of the owner of the car? So these are, kind of challenges that are pretty similar in that way.
That will be solved. What I'm curious about is if this car is really smart, and it needs its own bank account, of course, because it will drive itself up for repairs and upgrades. And at some point, it's so smart that it will come to the conclusion that it's no longer feasible, and it has to buy new cars. And maybe it has been driving other people around, acting as a cab, earning money. So it can buy a new car, maybe it can buy 3 new cars. And whose cars are those? And they start thinking and acting amongst themselves. So And then a car is a physical entity, of course. If you want to dive into this discussion, go look for the Digital Car Key Consortium, because that's also a thing, digital car keys, and of course they need to be in wallets. And I need to be able to lend out my car to my neighbor. Maybe I have a company with a car fleet, or I have some sort of green wheels organization. There's so many challenges involved there. So my argument is, if we can grab organizational identity, we are in a really good position to take on the future in that area.
Yeah, just maybe to add on that, just that our legal systems are meant to work for natural persons, right? And
no, they work for legal persons as well.
Yeah, but if you look at when change happens, like look at, for example, GDPR or NIS2 directive, companies start acting when there are fines in the mix. Or you can look on the national levels as well about, if you look at warfare, for example, and state and non-state actors, I feel like at least there is more pressure when you have one natural person on the spot that is being held liable. And if you detach that, it makes it a bit more wishy-washy. I think it's the
no
people
detaching.
as well. But
That's a super important point, but as Esther highlighted, even with a legal person, there's always, or let's say usually, a natural person related, like somebody is liable, right? And these are, for example, these official roles that I mentioned. Yeah? So if you know which legal entity is liable, you have very good chances that you also find a natural person or a group of natural persons who are liable.
Yeah.
Shall we continue this discussion during the break? Because I think that's really important. So giving a big hand for Christoph. Esther.